Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down big ideas using insights directly from the source material. Today, we're tackling something huge, a concept that's both ancient and, let's be honest, more relevant than ever: courage.
I mean, it's a question we've all probably asked ourselves at some point, right? And according to our sources, finding the answer means we can't just look at today. We have to rewind way back to the great classical virtues.
So let's get into it. Where did this whole idea of courage even come from? Well, the sources take us back to the classical world, which had a very specific, and I mean really powerful, idea of what it meant to be courageous.
The ancient Greeks had a word for it, Andrea. And you gotta understand, this wasn't just about bravery on a battlefield. It was way more than that. Think of it as this all-encompassing virtue. It's strength, it's endurance, and it's the sheer grit to face down not just enemies, but fear itself. For them, it was an absolutely essential piece of a life well lived.
Now this is where it gets really fascinating. Look at how courage sits right there with prudence, justice, and temperance. It wasn't some optional extra. For great thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, you literally could not be a good person without it. Each of these virtues needed the others. They were all part of the same package, creating a whole, balanced person.
Okay, but here's where things take a sharp turn. Our sources argue that this classic, muscular understanding of courage, it's in a full-blown crisis today. That we've somehow traded this pillar of virtue for something, well, something a lot softer.
Wow, this quote from our source material really just lays it out there, doesn't it? It's a pretty bold claim that an active, challenging virtue like courage has been swapped out for something way more passive. The goal today, it argues, isn't to be brave anymore, it's just to be nice.
And this slide just perfectly illustrates the difference. On one side, you have courage. It's bold, it's assertive, it's about taking responsibility, it's active. On the other side, you have niceness. It's passive, it's about not offending anyone, and its main goal is to avoid conflict. It's all about not rocking the boat no matter what.
So the big question is, how on earth did this happen? How did we get from that classical ideal of Andrea to this modern culture of passivity? Well, our sources argue that the answer, the root of it all, can be traced back to a single pivotal moment in the biblical story, a moment that set a brand new pattern for humanity.
The sources point us directly to the Garden of Eden, to the story of the fall, because it's right here, they argue, that fear makes its dramatic entrance onto the world stage, not just as a survival instinct, but as a direct response to doing wrong.
Now really think about what's happening here. The very first human reaction to sin isn't defiance, isn't anger, it's fear. And what does that fear immediately lead to? Hiding. Inaction. A total retreat from taking any responsibility.
And according to the sources, this sets the blueprint, the pattern of failure that just echoes down through history, a pattern that's totally rooted in fear. Instead of facing what you've done, the instinct is to hide, to dodge responsibility, and of course, to blame someone else.
But that is not the end of the story, not even close, because the sources present this powerful, stark contrast to that pattern of fear. A completely different model, one that is all about confronting fear head-on, even when facing certain death.
Okay, notice this, because it is absolutely key. Fear is there. The text is clear, he trembled with fear. But, and this is the game changer, the fear doesn't win. It doesn't get the final say. The action does. In spite of the fear, he pushes through.
So right here, we get a whole new model for courage. It's not about being fearless. It's about acting righteously in spite of being overwhelmed by fear. It's about facing the impossible, doing your duty, and carrying the weight for others instead of hiding from it.
So, the way the sources frame this is as a profound story of two responses with two totally different outcomes. One man's failure, born from fear, leads to a fall. Another man's courage, staring that same fear in the face, leads to redemption. So, what in the world does that mean for us?
And that brings us to the final and maybe the most important question of all. What does this model of moral courage actually look like for us, right now, in our day-to-day lives?
And here it is. This is the crucial takeaway. The goal is not to be fearless. That's a myth. True courage, our sources say, is born right in that moment of collision, that split second where your desire to do the right thing smashes head-on into your fear of what might happen, and you choose to act anyway.
And the sources show how this plays out in really normal, everyday moments. We're not talking about slaying dragons here.
It's the courage to speak up when a friend tells a harmful joke. It's taking responsibility for your own screw-ups instead of pointing fingers. And it's having the fortitude to just do what you know is right, especially when it's the hardest thing to do.
And there's one last critical point of balance here. This strength, this courage, it's not about being aggressive. It is the absolute opposite of being passive, yes, but it has to be guided and tempered by love. It's a strength that's meant to protect and to serve, not to dominate.
And so we end with a question that kind of turns this whole explainer back on us. If the sources define courage as acting righteously despite your fear, then the real question for all of us is, what fear is preventing you from acting?